Praise God. It's been so good to be together, and just want to share a couple thoughts of encouragement as we close, and then we're going to have a time of communion together before we go out. I do want to say a couple of you have been asking, how do we get our hands on the recordings of these sessions to have and to share with others? The easiest way for you, if you're able, they will be uploaded on YouTube. If you just go on YouTube and search the Francis Asbury Society, we have a page there, and that's where we're uploading everything. You may want to download them. If you're techie enough, there is a way to do that off of YouTube. But if you want a jump drive, like a USB drive with these sessions, we can do that. Just call the office, and Kathy, who's the best receptionist in the entire universe, she will be... See, I got a agreement here. She would be happy to help you and send you a USB drive of these sessions. I was thinking, like Ron, I'm from New Jersey. Sarcasm is my native tongue, and I like a good joke. I like to joke around a lot, and I was thinking, again, I don't know why I'm up here sharing with Ron and Bill, and I was thinking, well, I have my former boss and my new boss. There's got to be a joke in there somewhere. And then a voice said, no, we don't joke about such things. It is an absolute blessing and honor for me personally to know these two gentlemen, to count them as friends. Long history with Ron. Ron has a longer history with my wife, who he calls Laurie all the time. My wife's name is Kelly, but he knows Kelly's mama. And Ron invited us to come to Wilmore and join FAS after our time serving overseas in Uganda, and just so grateful for that invitation. And then to get to know Bill, obviously more recently, just so blessed and encouraged, and he's already much more than a boss, and he's a friend, and just so grateful to be on this journey together. So I'm honored to, again, I don't know why they asked me to close, but I'm honored to share the podium with these two wonderful men of God. I want to share just what the Lord has been teaching me really over the past year. We're talking about pursuing the Holy One. We've had some just phenomenal teaching to go home and to chew on. And again, I just want to leave you with some encouraging words. But you're aware of the outpouring that happened back in February at Asbury University. If you don't know, Kelly and I, one of our roles with the Francis Asbury Society, and one of the invitations that Ron gave us a few years ago was student ministry. And to come alongside Gen Z, our younger generation, and engage them in discipleship, as they, pursue Jesus and Jesus pursues them. That is just such a thrill for us. And so being in Wilmore, obviously Asbury is one of the easiest and the fastest ways to get connected with young people. And Jesus has opened other doors as well, which would love, if you're interested, to share with you about that. But Kelly and I have been privileged to walk alongside a handful of students and to journey with them, and wow, were we privileged in February to be able to have a front row seat to watch God pour himself out in such a powerful way, and to continue to walk in the ripple effects of that there in Wilmore. Ron made a comment earlier in our time together that it really starts with God pursuing us, right? And then we respond in pursuit of him. And February 18th of this year was a normal day on the campus of Asbury University. For years, obviously since the 78th revival, and I know there was, I don't know much of the story, but I know something significant happened in the 90s as well. But year after year, at least since we've been here, we always hear faculty and staff and students wondering, when's the next outpouring? And I love that spirit of expectancy. And God has done it before. We know he'll do it again, and just wondering, could this be the year? And so last school year, that's you would hear that same thing, and we knew that there were pockets of students and staff praying, not for an event, but for God to pour himself out in a new and fresh way. And I know that on February 18th, again, and this was just as normal on the campus of Asbury University, I know that morning there were students praying and asking God to pour himself out. And then that chapel service, and you've heard the stories, I'm sure, but that chapel service was similar to many other chapel services. And students, like they are every time, were given the opportunity. If you don't have to run off to class and you want to stay behind and linger, you're welcome at the altar to pray and to worship. And so a handful, 20, 30, some students, took advantage of that. And then, and this is where we kind of lose our ability to articulate why this happened or how this happened, but something shifted, God shifted, and just poured himself out among those students gathered there in Hughes Auditorium, poured himself out in such a special way. And students began, who were not in Hughes but heard about it, began running around campus telling their friends, interrupting professors as they're teaching, you have to come back to Hughes. You have to come back. God's doing something. And testimony after testimony, as people walked into Hughes, is that feeling, that tangible feeling of the presence of God pouring himself out. Loving on the students there at Asbury, making himself known in a new and fresh way. For those 3 or 4 days, and we know it lasted, into the, I forget, 20-some days or whatever. But those first 3 or 4 days was just a beautiful exchange of pursuit, of God loving on the students at Asbury. It's very targeted for them. Obviously, everyone was welcome. But just loving and just letting these students know how much he loves them. And them responding in worship back to him. I've heard some side conversations. Music played a huge theme, and we got criticized for that, and whatever. Music played a huge theme in this outpouring. And I believe it's because these students respond and worship in that way. They resonate in that way. And just singing back to God. And in a very low-key, not high-tech kind of way. But it really, and again, just the words, it's hard to find the words, but those first few days was just a beautiful exchange of pursuits. I'll never forget, either the first day or the second day, I snuck into Hughes. That's when you could get into Hughes, and went up into the balcony and just kind of wanted to be a fly on the wall and to watch. And I remember during the testimony time, a young lady, a student there at Asbury, getting up and sharing the testimony of just feeling so alone, and how she had driven down not too long ago down the High Bridge, planning to take her life. But God intervened and stopped her. And I'll never forget her crying out, I feel unseen, I'm so alone, I'm so alone. And then all throughout the auditorium, we see you, we see you, we see you. Her fellow classmates letting her know, no, you are not alone. And that was also God, through her classmates, letting her know you are not alone. And they converged upon her in a loving embrace, just praying for her. Later that night, that young lady was on stage leading in worship to God. That beautiful pursuit of the Holy One. For me personally, obviously you do get kind of tempted into that this is an event, right, mentality, like something significant is happening. And I remember that first weekend, the major crowds were not there. It was really still a Wilmore community type thing. But falling into that trap of how many hours will this go, right? How many days? Will we break the record of the 70s revival? And God checking my spirit and saying, Josh, there is something significant and special happening for Gen Z, for these students here. But what about you? Are you going to pursue me? Because I'm here for you as well. And so just, not just checking me, but showering me with his love for me. And I'm pursuing you as well. And I had to, and so I went down and spent some time at the altar and just letting God's love wash over me, and then engaging in that pursuit, that exchange of pursuit of him as well. And so I learned some lessons from that time that I want to share with you, and we are going to read a story in the scripture as well. But as the multitudes then began to flock in, a shift happened, and people wanted to see. And the first lesson that we learned very quickly is that people are hungry for God. They are hungry for God. The miles that people came, the sacrifices that they made just to get to Wilmore, Kentucky. The only reason you know of it is because of the Asburies, right? But people began to hear God is doing something. God has shown up in Wilmore, Kentucky, and so they began driving and flying, selling vehicles to get plane tickets, and coming to just get a glimpse of Jesus. And I just, you would walk the line, we would call it. They'd be in line for hours upon hours just to get into Hughes, and you'd walk the line and you would just see these smiling faces and this heavenly patience of waiting in line, and just everyone in a good mood to wait, to maybe see Jesus, right? Well, one other story I wanted to share from my time there, there was one night I was across the street in Estes Chapel. I was on a late night prayer shift, and we were at this point, thousands upon thousands of people had come into Wilmore. The seminary had opened up multiple locations. Local churches had opened up their sanctuaries to stream what was happening, and I was in Estes Chapel ready to just pray for whoever needed prayer. And I believe David Thomas was the one sharing. If you were here last year, you know David Thomas. If you're part of Seedbed, you know David Thomas, and he shared a brief message about just pursuing the Holy One, pursuing the love that God has for us, the love of the Father that he has for us. And some people came forward there at the altar in Estes Chapel, and I remember there's a man in the middle, dead middle of there's no actual rail there, it's just a step, but he's there in the dead middle, and he is laying on his face there at the altar. And all I noticed was he's dressed in black. And so I went up and I put my arm around him, and this man shot up like a lightning bolt. And he had a collar on. And I quickly learned he was a priest. And come to find out, he's St. Leo's Church in Versailles, Kentucky. He's the lead priest, whatever you call that. And I asked him, I said, is there anything I can pray with you about? And Father Chris Clay wanted to experience in a fresh way the love of the Father. And so we began praying, and I wish he was here to tell the story, because all I know is that Jesus met him in a powerful way. Powerful way. And I just thought, what a privilege. And here was a Catholic priest who was just hungry for the love of the Father. And so he came. He probably had all the excuses in the world to maybe question what was happening. What would his congregation think if he went to that Wesley Holiness Institution in Wilmore? But he had to get to Jesus. He had to experience it, and I know that Jesus met him in a powerful way. And so as I've continued to reflect on the outpouring there, and then was preparing for our time at Hemlock, Jesus has just been reminding me. Now, I've been following Jesus for 40 years, basically. I grew up in the church. And sometimes I can fall into this temptation of, not that I've arrived, because I'm nowhere near there, but I've been to countless of these kinds of retreats and events, right? And I think there's similar, you're like me. is there more for me? And yeah, there is. There's so much more. And just continuing to pursue him as he continues to pursue me. Him pursuing others doesn't mean that there's anything less available for me who's been walking with him for 40 years. There's a bottomless well of love that he has for me. And I guess that most of you are like me in that you've been walking with Jesus for some time now. And I just want to encourage you, there's a bottomless well of love that he has, and he's continually pursuing you. And so then, and I'm a very practical guy. I'm black and white. And that's just how he made me. But I just ask the question, how then do I keep pursuing him? And I like to keep it really, really simple. If you'll turn with me, if you have your Bibles, Luke chapter 19. How many grew up in the church in Sunday school learning the songs? Okay, do you remember a wee little man? Right? Yeah. We're going to talk about Zacchaeus a little bit. I was praying and asking Jesus, what are some examples of people who have pursued you that I can learn from? And he gave me two names. We're going to talk about Zacchaeus, but I've been dwelling on Zacchaeus and Nicodemus recently. But you want to go home today, so we'll just look at Zacchaeus. So Luke 19, let me just read the story. I won't sing the song. This is the inspired version. Luke 19, starting in verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost." So we know the song about Zacchaeus. We even know a song of the history of Zacchaeus' town, of Jericho, right? So Jericho has a history, not a great one. And Jericho is known as the city of palms. At this time, it's a beautiful city. It's obviously been restored long after God knocked down the walls. But carrying with it the curse, carrying with it the history of what happened. But Jericho at this point in time has become a pretty wealthy city. That's where a lot of the wealthy people stayed. Your chief tax collector, Zacchaeus, being one of them. And I'm not going to read it, but the passage right before this, it's the passage of the beggar crying out to Jesus, the blind beggar crying out to receive his sight. And beggars would line the street on either side of Jericho. You got to pass through Jericho to get up to Jerusalem or to come back out of Jerusalem. And the beggars would line the streets coming in and out of Jericho. Why? Well, that's where the wealthy people were. That's where they can get some help, right? And so they would line the streets. And so Jesus comes in to Jericho, and we know that Jesus is on a mission. I mean, he's on a greater mission. He's going into Jerusalem. This is shortly before Palm Sunday. But Jesus has a specific mission in Jericho to meet Zacchaeus. If you know the song, then you know some facts about being a tax collector. Zacchaeus was a traitor among his people. He's working for Rome, the occupier. He's collecting taxes on the Jews. And hey, he's got to make a living too, right? And so they're adding on top of the tax, to line their pockets. Now, he's a chief tax collector, so obviously there are levels here, and Zacchaeus has made his way to the top. And so here's a early version of the pyramid scheme of some sort, right? Zacchaeus, he has just got to be hated among his people. Getting wealthy off the backs of his own people, supporting the occupiers. I don't know, who are Zacchaeuses today? Rhetorical question for you to think about. But Zacchaeus knows something about Jesus, because he hears that Jesus is passing through, and something clicks inside of his heart and his mind. I have to see him. He wants to see him. We have no indication. This is a very short story, so we don't know exactly obviously, what's happening that day, but Zacchaeus has to see Jesus. He needs to get a glimpse of this man. And so Zacchaeus, who is a wee little man, has a hard time seeing over the heads of those around him. We're told because of the crowds, he can't get to him. Now, I know you're not allowed to add the scripture. I'm kind of reading between the lines. My guess is the crowds were not willing even to let Zacchaeus get to the front, right? If they have something up on Zacchaeus, not even just their height, some advantage over him, they're not going to let go of that, right? And so Zacchaeus can't get to the front of the crowds. He can't see over the crowds, but he has to get to Jesus. And as we're going through, I want us to just kind of look at the comparison of Zacchaeus and also this blind beggar who's the story right before. And just real quick, it's the blind beggar who shouts out, Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, and the crowds tell him, be quiet. And so what does he do? He just screams all the louder, right? No, I need Jesus. There's a beautiful comparison here. But Zacchaeus, how does he pursue Jesus? What can we learn from Zacchaeus? Number one, Zacchaeus drops any dignity that he's trying to uphold. He lets it go. He runs and he climbs a tree. When's the last time you climbed a tree? We adults generally don't do this much anymore, right? My son Seth, we were hiking recently in Virginia, and Seth is my outdoor nature one. He's always up for a hike, always up to do something outside. And he was always up for finding that tree that he could shimmy up along our hike. I don't know, there's something about kids and trees, right? They just look great to climb. Well, here's Zacchaeus, an older gentleman. We don't know exactly how old he is, but he's older. And he runs ahead of the crowd. So he's making a scene right there, running ahead of the crowd. He sees a tree, he says, if I can get up that tree, I'm going to see over the heads of everybody and I can see Jesus. So he drops the dignity. That doesn't matter anymore. I need to get to Jesus. Correlation back in February when the thousands upon thousands said, I need to get to Wilmore. Because of Wilmore? No. Because Jesus is only in Wilmore? No. But he's pouring himself out in a special way. I want to experience that. I need that. And so they dropped everything. They sold vehicles, got on airplanes, and they got themselves to Wilmore to meet with Jesus. So Jesus is moving through the crowds, and he comes to the spot where Zacchaeus is, and he looks up. He knows exactly where Zacchaeus is. And he says, Zacchaeus, you got to come down. I need to come to your house. Zacchaeus doesn't say, well, why don't we just have the conversation here? No, it says that immediately Zacchaeus came down and welcomed him gladly. And so one is that Zacchaeus dropped the dignity to pursue Jesus. Two is that Zacchaeus gladly let Jesus behind the door. He let him into his home. He said, Jesus, you want to come to my house? Again, this is a chief tax collector. He is wealthy. He has been cheating his own people. He probably lives on the expensive street there in Jericho with the big house. He says, Jesus, come on in. I'll give you access to my stuff. You're welcome. He welcomed him gladly. And so how do we pursue Jesus? Drop the dignity. Let them in. Open the doors. Open the closets. Say, Jesus, you have access to it all. I will welcome you gladly. We don't know the conversation, the details. We don't know all that Jesus said to him. We do know the response at the end, though, that we can learn from Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus repented. He turned from his life of sin. He turned from this path that he was on because of his encounter with Jesus, and he repented. A clear, I told you I like black and white. I like this shift. A clear, I was doing this, and I cannot do that any longer because of Jesus, and now I'm doing this. Remember that beggar who was crying out for Jesus? That blind beggar? His eyes were open. And he followed Jesus, it says, the passage just before this one. He followed Jesus, praising him. His eyes were open. Zacchaeus might not have been blind physically, but he was blind spiritually. And his eyes were opened. And he followed Jesus in obedience. Giving to the poor, selling his possessions, giving to the poor, making right the wrongs that he had done. 4 times. 4 times. If I cheated anyone, 4 times. Now this had to take time, right? I mean, he's a tax collector. There's logs written. And so I imagine, again, I don't know, but I imagine Zacchaeus went through his book, his log book there, of people who he had collected taxes from for how many years, I don't know. But whoever he cheated, he paid them back 4 times what he had cheated them. That obviously took some time. This repentance was an ongoing act of obedience to Jesus. He dropped his dignity to get to Jesus. He opened the door to his home and welcomed him in gladly, and he repented and changed course for the rest of his life, as far as we know. Now, I want to pause here for just a moment. A lot of times we read these stories. Who am I in the story? Who do you identify with? As I read, I'm preaching to myself. You just happen to be here right now. Sometimes I'm the crowd. Sometimes I'm the crowd trying to tell the blind beggar to be quiet, keeping the Zacchaeuses of the world away. You're not welcome here. It might not be a conscious decision, but I'm just wondering, man, am I the people in the crowd who are telling the blind beggar, be quiet? Am I the person in the crowd who sees Zacchaeus out of the corner of my eye, trying, and nope, I ain't letting him in. He's not welcome. That man cheated me. And then am I the crowd who's muttering as Jesus is in the home of a sinner? What is he doing there? What is Jesus doing with that man? He doesn't deserve it. Are we casting judgment on the Zacchaeuses of this world as they pursue the Holy One? Now, Zacchaeus was it seems like a pretty quick change. For others, it's going to take longer. It's going to take some time. Are we willing to let them pursue the Holy One as he pursues them? You know, we have a crisis, not just here in America, but in the world. We have a sexual identity crisis. What are we going to do when someone who's transitioned realizes they need to pursue the Holy One? Just throwing it out there. I'm wrestling with it myself. And the categories, it's not just that. The categories are endless, right? You have I was thinking of our celebrity Christians, our health, wealth, and prosperity preachers, we could say that they're Zacchaeuses, right? Making bank on a false gospel. I won't name any names, but what happens if that preacher who's preaching in a stadium full of thousands upon thousands of people, if he begins to truly pursue the Holy One? Are we going to keep him out? Are we going to mutter when his life begins to change by Jesus? It's hard, right? That's stuff I'm wrestling with. So as we have spent these days on the hill, on the back porch. We've talked about the pursuit of the Holy One. We're going to go now. You're going to be driving through some traffic today, maybe. Some of you are that dreaded city of Atlanta. You can pursue the Holy One even there in the highways of Atlanta. But as we get back into real life, regular life, here it's easy. The fellowship is sweet. The food is great. When we get back into the grind of each day, how do we pursue the Holy One? He's pursuing you. He's pursuing me. Let's let go of any dignity. If we get a glimpse of him, let's go running like Zacchaeus. Let's climb the tree if we have to. Let's open the doors and let him in. And let's respond in obedience and repentance of anything that he brings to the surface. Say, Jesus, it's yours. It's yours. We need to end on some really good words. Not quite the best words of the Scripture, but I read this. Actually, a friend sent this to me. We have a friend of FAS who has been so blessed by, and I know many of you have, this day with the Master. And he literally comes into the office and buys cases of them to give away. And then he began to find Spanish speakers who were, our blue-collar workers around the area. And so he began to buy cases of Spanish versions and gives them away as well. But he sent me this just this week. We had lunch together, and then he texted me August 17th from Dr. Kinlaw, called God's Greatest Gift. Brian, I don't know if this is the one you were referring to this morning or not. Let me read Dr. Kinlaw's words in closing today as we think about pursuing the Holy One as we go from this place. Here's what he says. The best gift God can give to any person is a hunger for himself. There is nothing we can do to make ourselves hungry for God. All salvation is from God, but if we will give him the chance, he will instill a hunger within. If that hunger is fed, he will intensify it until it is the burning passion of our life. I never would have found Christ if I had not had in my heart a hunger for him. Across the years of my life, the most stabilizing thing has been the hunger for God. He has never taken away my desire for him. The older I become, the more intense the hunger for him is. And I find myself thanking him for it and asking that he would intensify my appetite for him even more. If we are hungry, he will fill our need. And the greater our appetite for him is, the more of himself he will give to us. Praise God. That hunger is a promise of his presence. If he is near you, cry out to him like the blind beggar, or climb the tree like Zacchaeus. If you sense his presence, call out to him. If you feel him close, reach out, because in that moment he is findable, and you ought to lunge for him. He will not take all your troubles away, but he will protect you in the middle of trouble. When the storms come, he will be your hiding place, and he will endure them with you. The storm will rage around you, but you will be in the middle of him, and his presence is safety. He will even enable you to sing in the midst of the storm. That hunger for him becomes the greatest gift that anyone can be given. Let's continue hungering, asking for a hunger for him. We are going to, one of the best ways, I think, is to celebrate communion together. The body and the blood of Jesus given for us. And so Jerry is going to lead us in the liturgy communion. I'm going to hand out, if I find them. We have a few of these. We have about 20 copies. You might need to share with some neighbors around you. But Jerry, would you come and lead us as we pursue the Holy One through Holy Communion?